Penelope had sat through a lot of family events over the years. She had sat through the ones where her brother's accomplishments filled every conversation. She had sat through the ones where her parents' friends asked about her sister's career with the specific enthusiasm reserved for things the family was genuinely proud of. She had sat through dinners and gatherings and celebrations where her own life existed at the periphery of the family's story, present but uncentered, acknowledged but not examined. She had learned to manage it, but her cousin's engagement party was different. 105 guests. A venue her family had rented for the occasion. A microphone that carried voices to the back row. Her father had taken that microphone. He had made a toast, warm at first, celebratory, the kind of toast that engagement parties were built around. And then he pivoted. He had mentioned Penelope by name. He had said, in front of 105 people who were holding champagne glasses and looking at her, that she was the family member who had never quite found her footing, that some people took longer to figure out their place in the world, that the family was patient with her, said into a microphone. At a party. In front of everyone, Penelope had held her champagne glass and had not looked away from her father and had not changed her expression and had not said a single word. Because the woman standing next to her, a venture capital partner who had been seated beside her at dinner, had just spent 40 minutes asking Penelope questions about her company, and Penelope had answered all of them. And the business card in her jacket pocket had a title on it that was going to make her father's toast the most ironic moment of his social life. Before Claire picks up that business card and reads the title, and says your father just described the founder and CEO of a 7-figure software company as someone the family is patient with, hit subscribe right now. Because the 40 minutes of conversation that happened before the toast and the 40 minutes that happened after it are two of the most satisfying stretches in this entire story. New videos every single week. Hit like if you have ever built something real while the people who should have been watching were looking somewhere else. Drop a comment. Have you ever had someone see you clearly in a room where everyone else was getting it wrong? Now let's go back to Seattle, because Penelope's father just picked up the microphone, and Claire Huang is still sitting right beside her. My name is Penelope. I am 30 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington. For the past 5 years, I have been running a software company that I built from a single client and a clear market gap into something with 14 employees, an annual recurring revenue that crossed 7 figures 18 months ago. I had done this while my family told a specific story about me at every gathering, the story of the daughter who was still figuring things out, who hadn't quite found her footing, who the family supported with patient affection while waiting for her to arrive at something real. The story had been told enough times that the people who received it had accepted it as accurate. It was not accurate. But I had stopped correcting it a long time ago, because the company was the correction, and the company was being built whether anyone was watching or not. My cousin Adriana's engagement party had been planned for 3 months. Her parents and mine had co-organized it with the specific collaborative energy of 2 families who enjoyed the social occasions that milestone events provided. The venue was a banquet space in Bellevue that had good lighting and a sound system, and the kind of catering that people described as very well done rather than extraordinary, but that was exactly right for the occasion. 105 guests, extended family, family friends, colleagues of the parents, the particular assembled cross-section of 2 families' social worlds that engagement parties produced. I had driven from Seattle and had arrived at the pre-party cocktail hour in the specific composed way I arrived at family events, present, warm, and already managing my expectations for the evening. The seating arrangement had placed me beside a woman I did not recognize, which at a party of this size was unremarkable. She had introduced herself as Claire during the soup course, had said her name and the name of her fund in the straightforward way of someone who mentioned their credentials without emphasis because they were accustomed to them. I had recognized the fund name. It was one of the significant venture capital operations in the Seattle area, the kind that appeared in the regional business press in the context of substantial investments. I had said I knew the fund and had asked what sector she focused on. She had said B2B technology. I had said that was interesting. She had asked why. I had told her. The conversation had begun as a standard party exchange and had shifted somewhere around the second course into something that was not standard at all. Claire asked real questions, not the social version of professional questions, but the actual ones, the ones that required precise answers and that demonstrated she had understood the previous answer before formulating the next. She had asked about Bridgepoint's market positioning, its client acquisition model, its revenue structure, and the technical architecture of the integration platform. I had answered all of it clearly, specifically, in the register I used for serious professional conversations, rather than the simplified version I had learned to deploy in contexts where simplification was necessary. The party continued around us. We had both been aware of it and had both been more interested in the conversation we were having. My father had picked up the microphone at 8:45, between the main course and dessert, the standard moment for toasts at this kind of event. He had opened warmly with Adriana and her fiancé, had said the right things about love and commitment, and the families being joined, had been genuinely good in the first 3 minutes in the way he was genuinely good at these public moments. And then he pivoted. He had said he wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the whole family gathered in the room. He had mentioned my brother by name and said something about his legal career. He had mentioned my sister and said something about her graduate program. And then he had said my name, Penelope, and had looked across the room at me and had said, with the warm concern of someone delivering a compliment they believed was kind, that I was the family member who had never quite found her footing, that some people took longer, that the family was patient with me. I had been holding my champagne glass when he started, and I was holding it when he finished, had not set it down, had not changed my grip on it, had not changed my expression or my posture or anything about the way I was sitting in my chair. I had looked at my father across the room while he said it, had given him my full attention the way I gave everything my full attention, which was a habit I had developed, and which served me well in moments like this one, where the alternative was looking away, and looking away would have communicated something I was not interested in communicating. Claire was still beside me. I had been aware of her presence throughout the toast in the specific way I had been aware of her presence for the past 40 minutes, as the person who had just spent that time asking me detailed questions about my company. The room had moved on from the toast, the way rooms moved on from toasts, applause, glasses raised, the conversation resuming at its previous volume. My father had set down the microphone and had accepted the handshakes and the warm responses of people who had received his words as the affectionate family observation he had intended them as. Claire had looked at me. She had waited until the room's attention had fully redistributed, and then she had said, quietly, directly, in the same tone she had used for all her questions that evening, "Was that about you?" I had said yes. She had looked at me for a moment with the specific expression of someone who has just received a piece of information that recontextualizes something they had already been thinking about. Then she said, "Tell me more about the company." Penelope had graduated with a computer science degree at 22, had been a strong student in the specific way that produced genuine capability rather than academic credential. The kind of student whose professors remembered her not for her grades, but for the questions she asked in the final 10 minutes of class, when most people were already closing their laptops. She had taken a position at an enterprise software firm in Seattle immediately after graduation, not the highest paying offer she had received, but the one that would teach her the most about how B2B software operated at scale, which was what she had decided she needed to know. She had spent 3 years learning everything the firm had to teach her. Then she had left and had started building the thing she had been designing in her mind for the final 18 months of her employment. Bridgepoint software had been built around a specific observation Penelope had made during her 3 years at the enterprise firm, that mid-sized logistics companies existed in a particular technology gap that the market had not adequately addressed. They were too large for the small business software solutions that served the bottom of the market and too small for the enterprise platforms that served the top, caught in a middle space where their workflow integration needs were real and significant and consistently underserved by the available options. She had mapped the gap carefully during her final year at the firm, had talked to logistics operations managers, had documented the specific friction points, had designed a solution architecture that addressed those points without the implementation complexity that made enterprise software inaccessible to mid-sized operations. She had left the firm on a Friday and had begun building on a Monday. The first client had come through a professional contact, a logistics operations manager she had met at an industry event during her enterprise firm years, who had heard her describe the gap and had said, "If you build it, call me first." She had called him 8 months after leaving the firm with a functional beta version, and he had run a 60-day pilot and had signed a contract at the end of it. The contract had been modest, enough to cover her immediate expenses and confirm that the product worked in a real operational environment. She had spent the rest of the first year building the second and third clients from referrals the first client had generated. By the end of year one, she had 3 paying clients, a product that had been validated in real logistics environments, and a clear picture of where the next 12 months needed to go. The trade publication feature had come in year 4, a B2B technology journal that covered emerging platforms in the enterprise software space, had included Bridgepoint in its annual top 20 emerging platforms list. The article had been 2 paragraphs, specific, accurate, describing the platform's market positioning and growth trajectory, with the factual precision of a publication whose readers were industry professionals who required accuracy rather than enthusiasm. Penelope's full name had appeared in the article. Her title, founder and chief executive officer, had appeared below it. The article had been published in a journal that circulated in the regional business and technology community and had been picked up by 2 industry newsletters that had broader distribution. A family friend had sent it to her parents. She had not sent it herself. Her mom had mentioned the article at the next family dinner, had said that someone had forwarded it to them, and that it was nice to see Penelope's name in print. She had said it with the warm, genuine affection she brought to Penelope's achievements when they were brought to her attention, affection that was real, and that existed alongside a complete absence of curiosity about what the achievement represented. She had said it's nice and had asked about Penelope's brother's law practice in the same breath, a pivot so natural and so immediate that it had communicated something more clearly than a direct statement would have. Penelope had said thank you and had answered the question about her brother, and had driven home that evening with the specific understanding that the article had not changed the family's story about her because the family had received it without reading what it actually said. Year 5 had produced the inflection that changed what Bridgepoint was, not in the sudden way of companies that had visible breakthrough moments, but in the compounding way of a business that had been building carefully and had reached the point where the building became visible in the numbers. The annual recurring revenue figure had crossed 7 figures for the first time in January. The 14th employee had joined in March. 3 new enterprise contracts had closed in the second quarter, each one larger than the largest contract from year 4. An inbound inquiry from a regional logistics association had produced a speaking engagement that had generated 2 more client conversations. The investor interest had begun arriving in the form of emails from funds she had not contacted. She had been managing them professionally and deferring them without particular urgency because she had not yet decided what outside investment meant for the company she had built alone. She had not told her parents the revenue figure, had made a specific decision not to, sometime in year 3, when she had understood clearly that the information would be received the way the article had been received, with warm, genuine affection that did not produce curiosity. She had not told them the employee count. She had not mentioned the investor inquiries. She had not described the enterprise contracts, or the speaking engagement, or the industry recognition that had been accumulating since year 4. None of this had been withheld from a place of strategy or spite. It had simply been information she had stopped offering to people who had consistently demonstrated that they would receive it without the specific quality of attention that made sharing it worth the effort. She had company. The company had been the point. She had stopped needing the family to understand it and had focused on building it instead. The seating arrangement at the engagement party had been managed by Adriana's mother, Penelope's aunt, with the specific organizational attention she brought to family events that required logistical precision. Penelope had found her place card at a table near the center of the room, good placement, neither the head table nor the periphery, the kind of position that communicated included without being featured. She had arrived at the table during the cocktail to dinner transition and had found the woman on her right already seated, reading something on her phone with the focused efficiency of someone using a brief available window rather than performing accessibility. The place card to Penelope's right read Claire Huang. Penelope had set her bag under her chair and had introduced herself and had asked what Claire did. Claire had introduced herself with the specific economy of someone accustomed to professional contexts: name, fund, sector focus, delivered in the same breath without particular emphasis on any element. She had said she was a partner at Meridian Ventures, that she focused on B2B technology, and had asked what Penelope did in the same fluid continuation of the introduction that established an exchange rather than a monologue. She had not led with the fund's name the way people led with things they expected to impress. She had mentioned it the way people mentioned accurate information. Penelope had registered the fund name, had recognized it from regional business coverage, understood its scale and its significance, and had not mentioned the recognition. She had simply answered the question Claire had asked. Penelope had said she ran a software company, had said it simply, without the qualifications that people sometimes added when they were uncertain how their answer would be received. She had said the company was in B2B workflow integration for logistics. She had said it was 5 years old. She had said she had built it from a single client observation about a market gap that the available products were not addressing. She had said all of this in approximately 40 words, the specific compressed accuracy of someone who had explained the company enough times to know exactly what it was and how to describe it without excess. Claire had looked at her with the particular quality of attention that shifted when someone heard something that activated genuine professional interest. She had said, "Tell me about the gap." The shift had happened somewhere in the first 5 minutes, the moment when it became clear that this was not the social version of a professional conversation, but the actual one. Claire had asked about the gap with the specific curiosity of someone who knew the market and was testing whether Penelope's description of it matched her own understanding. Penelope had described it in the same terms she used internally: the mid-market logistics space, the implementation complexity that excluded enterprise solutions, the feature limitations that made small business products insufficient, the specific workflow friction points she had documented before building the product. Claire had listened with complete attention and had asked 2 questions that told Penelope she had understood the description precisely. The party had receded. Both of them had allowed it to. Penelope had walked Claire through Bridgepoint's model with the same directness she brought to investor conversations she had actually prepared for, which this was not, but which she was capable of conducting regardless of preparation, because the company was something she knew completely. She had described the client acquisition model, primarily referral-driven, supplemented by industry event presence, with an inbound channel that had emerged organically in year 4 as the platform's reputation in the logistics community had developed. She had described the contract structure: annual recurring revenue, implementation fee, tiered pricing based on operational scale. She had described the client retention rate, which was high, because the platform addressed a real problem in a real way, and the clients who adopted it did not have a compelling reason to leave it. Claire had asked about funding history at the point in the conversation where a professional investor asked it, after she had understood the market, the model, and the traction, at the moment when the funding question changed from background information to something that mattered to the specific calculation she was making. She had asked it directly: had Bridgepoint taken outside investment? Penelope had said no, had said bootstrapped 5 years. The company had been built entirely on client revenue without outside capital. Claire had been quiet for a moment in the way of someone recalibrating. She had said, 5 years, bootstrapped in this market to where you are now. Penelope had said yes. Claire had said, and the current ARR is what I think it is from what you described earlier. Penelope had said she could be more specific if Claire wanted the number. Penelope had given her the number, the current annual recurring revenue figure, stated clearly and without the hedging that people sometimes used when delivering financial information they were uncertain would land well. The figure was accurate as of the previous month's close, and she had given it as such. Claire had set her wine glass down. Not with drama, just the specific deliberate movement of someone who had decided that holding a wine glass was no longer the right activity for the moment they were in. She had looked at Penelope with the specific recalibrated attention of someone who had been having a good professional conversation and had just understood that they were actually having a significant one. She had said, "You have been building this for 5 years with no outside capital, and you are at this revenue number." Penelope had said yes. Claire had said, "Why haven't you been raised?" The main course had been cleared, and the dessert had not yet arrived when her father had stood and reached for the microphone, the specific timing of someone who had been waiting for the transitional moment that engagement party toasts required. Penelope had been mid-sentence in her answer to Claire's "why haven't you raised" question, had been explaining her thinking about capital efficiency and the specific advantages of building without the growth pressure that outside investment sometimes created, when she had heard her father's voice come through the sound system. She had paused. Claire had paused. Both of them had given the toast the attention that a microphone in a room of 105 people commanded. Penelope had picked up her champagne glass. She had listened to her father say her name. After Claire's question, "Was that about you?" and Penelope's answer and Claire's "tell me more about the company," Penelope had reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and had removed her business card. She had placed it on the table between them with the same unhurried deliberateness she brought to most things, not sliding it across as a presentation, just placing it in the space where Claire could reach it. The card was clean and professional, white stock, simple typography, no design elements beyond what the information required. It had the Bridgepoint software logo in the upper left corner, her name in the center, her title beneath it, the Seattle address and her direct contact information below that. She had had them printed in year 2 when the company had been real enough to require them. She had been handing them out for 3 years. Claire had picked up the card and had read it with the complete attention she brought to everything, which meant she had read it fully rather than skimming it. The logo, the company name, the title, founder and chief executive officer. She had held it for a moment after reading it, the specific pause of someone sitting with what a piece of information had just produced in them. Then she had looked at Penelope across the table, with an expression that contained several things simultaneously. The professional recalibration of an investor who had just confirmed something significant, and underneath that something more human, the specific expression of a person who had just witnessed something unjust and was deciding what to say about it. She had said, "Your father just described the founder and CEO of a 7-figure software company as someone the family is patient with." Penelope had said, "Yes." She had said it in the same register she had used throughout the evening, not performing composure, just embodying it, the specific quality of a person who had processed this particular reality a long time ago and was no longer raw from it. Claire had looked at her for a moment and had said, "Does he know?" Penelope had said, "He knows I run a company. He has never asked what it does or what it has become." Claire had been quiet for a moment with that. She had looked at the business card in her hand, and then at the room where Penelope's father was accepting warm handshakes for his toast, and then back at Penelope. She had said, "I want to ask you something directly." Penelope had said, "Go ahead." Claire had said, "Have you ever thought about what the right capital partner would do for Bridgepoint's next 3 years?" Penelope had thought about it before answering, not because the answer was complicated, but because the question deserved the specific quality of response that came from genuine consideration rather than reflexive deflection or reflexive enthusiasm. She had said that she had thought about it. She had said that her hesitation about outside investment had not been philosophical but practical. She had not yet encountered a capital partner whose understanding of the mid-market logistics space and whose investment approach had seemed genuinely aligned with how she had built Bridgepoint and where she intended to take it. She had said that the conversations she had fielded had felt like she was being asked to fit the company into a framework rather than being offered support for the framework she had already built. Claire had listened to all of it. Then she reached into her own jacket pocket. Claire had placed her own card on the table beside Penelope's, had placed it with the same unhurried deliberateness Penelope had used, the gesture of someone making a reciprocal and intentional exchange rather than a transactional one. Her card had the Meridian Ventures logo, her name, her title, partner, and her direct contact information, including a mobile number that Penelope understood was not the main fund line. Claire had said she wanted to have a proper conversation about Bridgepoint, not at a party, not between courses, but a real conversation with the right preparation and the right time. She had said Meridian had been looking for a company in this space for 2 years and had not found one that matched their criteria. She had said, "I think I just found it sitting next to me at my colleague's cousin's engagement party." The dessert had arrived, and both of them had let it sit untouched while the conversation continued, had moved from the general to the specific in the way that conversations moved when two people had decided they were doing something real. Claire had asked about the company's geographic expansion plans, its product roadmap, the specific logistics segments where Penelope saw the greatest near-term opportunity. Penelope had answered all of it with the same precision she had brought to the first 40 minutes. The answers existed because she had been thinking about these questions for 5 years and had arrived at accurate positions on all of them through the specific process of building a company that required her to. Around them, the engagement party had continued, toasts had been made, cake had been cut, music had started in the far corner of the room. Her father had not looked in her direction again. Claire had not taken her eyes off her. The formal term sheet had arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement party. 2 weeks after the proper conversation, Claire had requested, which had taken place in Meridian Ventures' Seattle office on a Wednesday afternoon, with Penelope's financial records and product documentation, and 3 years of client retention data laid out on the conference table. The term sheet was specific and clean, Meridian's proposed investment, the valuation it implied, the governance structure Claire had described during their office meeting as the one her fund used for founder-led companies, where preserving the founder's operational authority was the point rather than the exception. Penelope had read it once through completely, and then had read the valuation line a second time, and a third time before she had called her CFO and read it to him over the phone. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Penelope." She had said, "I know." She had called her parents on a Thursday evening, had waited until the term sheet had been reviewed by her attorney, and she had a complete and accurate picture of what it represented before she made the call. She had not called to seek their approval or their input. She had called because they were her parents, and the information was significant, and she had decided they deserved to receive it directly from her rather than through the family network that would carry it eventually regardless. Her mom had answered, and her dad had joined on speaker the way they took calls together when they expected the conversation to be family news rather than a specific professional update. Penelope had said she had news about the company. She had told them about the term sheet, about Meridian Ventures, about the valuation the investment implied. She had said it clearly and completely and had waited. Her father had asked how she knew Claire Huang, had asked it with the specific quality of someone trying to understand a sequence of events that had produced an outcome he had not anticipated. He had asked it as a practical question rather than a suspicious one, genuinely trying to assemble the picture. Penelope had told him. She had said Claire had been seated beside her at Adriana's engagement party 3 weeks ago. She had said they had spent 40 minutes talking about Bridgepoint during the dinner service. She had said Claire had given her a card and had asked for a proper meeting, and that the meeting had taken place the following week, and had produced the term sheet she had just described. She had said all of it in the sequential order it had occurred because that was the accurate way to describe it. Her father had been quiet after she finished. The silence on the line after Penelope described the sequence had a specific quality. She had heard enough of her father's silences over 30 years to read their different registers, and this one was the particular silence of a man who was connecting 2 points that had just produced an outcome he had not intended when he made the decision that created the first point. He was connecting the toast, the patient with her toast, delivered into a microphone at a party of 105 people, to the woman who had been sitting beside his daughter when he delivered it, to the 40 minutes of conversation that had preceded it, to the term sheet that was now sitting in his daughter's attorney's inbox. She did not help him make the connection. She let the silence do the work it was doing. Her mom had broken the silence, had asked about the valuation in the specific practical register she used when she was processing something significant, and needed to anchor herself in the concrete details rather than the implications. She had asked Penelope to say the number again. Penelope had said it again, the same number, stated with the same even delivery she had used the first time, because the number was accurate and accurate numbers did not require different delivery on repetition. The line had gone quiet again after she said it, a different quality of quiet from her father's silence, more like the specific stillness of a person hearing a number that was not consistent with the story they had been telling about the person it described. Penelope had waited. The quiet had lasted long enough to carry its own weight before her mom had said, "We didn't know it had grown to this." Her dad had spoken next, had said he hadn't known the company had reached that scale, that if he had known he would have, and then he had paused before finishing the sentence in a way that suggested he was uncertain what the end of it was. Penelope had listened to the pause and had decided to say the true thing rather than the comfortable one. She had said, "You never asked, Dad." She had said it without sharpness, and without the performance of a person delivering a prepared line. She had said it as the simple, accurate statement it was. She had said she had stopped sharing information about the company when it had become clear that the information was being received without the quality of attention that made sharing it worth the effort. She had said she had not done this from bitterness. She had done it because the company had been the point, and the company had not required his attention to grow. She had ended the call and had sat at her desk in her Seattle office in the specific quiet of a Thursday evening when most of the team had gone home. The term sheet was on her screen, the valuation, the governance structure, the investment amount that Meridian Ventures was prepared to put behind what she had built for 5 years without outside capital, and without the family's attention, and without the story they had told about her being true for a single day of the 5 years it had been told. Claire's business card was beside her keyboard, the partner title, the Meridian Ventures logo, the mobile number that had been the right point of contact for the right conversation at the right moment. She looked at her own business card beside it, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Bridgepoint Software. She had them printed in year 2. She had been handing them out for 3 years. Her father had never asked to see one. She turned back to the term sheet on her screen and began reading it from the beginning one more time. There was work to do. There had always been work to do. That had never been the part that required anyone else's attention.